Hello and welcome to the Christmas edition of Newspeak. We're going to be looking at the year in review here in Peter Whittle's beautiful home, and we're of course joined by the founder and director of the New Culture Forum, Peter Whittle. We're also joined, as usual, by historian and senior fellow Rafe Heydel-Mankoo and by Philip Kiszely, also senior fellow and historian and academic. So we are going to be talking, as I say, about the year in review. We're going to go through some of the biggest themes and subjects that we've seen this year, and there's an awful lot to cover. And we'll be also looking at some of our personal best bits. So shall we begin, Rafe, by talking about the biggest story of this year, and that focuses on the monarchy, which is very timely given that we're here in Windsor.
Yes, absolutely, with Windsor Castle just behind us, and what a year it's been for the monarchy, from the sublime to the ridiculous. Ridiculous being the Netflix documentary of Harry and Meghan, the less of which we speak about the better. But clearly the major event of the year has been the death of our sovereign lady, the Queen. Indeed, one of the top 10 events of the decade in not just British history, but I think global history. And I was just trying to think, 2012 to 2022, I'd say probably even in the top 5. You know, we've got COVID, war in Ukraine, election of Trump, Brexit, and I think the death of the Queen puts it into that top 5. And it's a significant event because really we're not just mourning the death of someone who served this nation, but it's almost as if we're mourning the death of a certain Britain. Or are actually those predictions of death premature, because we saw from the outpouring of love and affection for the Queen that same old British stoicism present, with these vast queues going down the Thames, people queuing for 12, 13, 14, 15 hours to get a chance to glimpse. But the Queen's reign really symbolises, I think, the change in Britain, some might say the decline in Britain, a reign that started when we still had an empire. It was the embers of empire, but we still had an empire. And the Queen's reign ended in a post-industrial society that bears almost no resemblance in many ways to the country that she inherited in 1952. And I think in so many ways that story, that journey, became very, very much present in all our lives through her death.
Peter, how do you think, looking forward to the coronation of Charles next year, how do you understand the significance of this, not only this monumental historical moment of the Queen passing away, but also everything that's come after that, whether it's to do with the way that the monarchy is talking about reforming itself, slimming itself down, and also what we've seen with the damage that's being wrought by Harry and Meghan?
Yes, I mean, I think for my part, I mean, obviously it's interesting because here we are in Windsor, and this has been a sort of epicenter, along with London, of a lot of the things that's happened this year. Obviously the Queen, some memories are imprinted forever. You have to remember as well, we had the Platinum Jubilee, which was this extraordinary celebration. And further along the road there is the Long Walk, which is that famous processional walk. And we were there to celebrate and see the beacon go up in June. And then of course we were there to see her coffin go past in September. And so it's been a most extraordinary time. I would say the monarchy has got to be very, very careful. If you've been watching the channel, we've all been talking about this week. I think what they did with Lady Susan Hussey was unforgivable, and I think that actually that might be a kind of Rubicon that they've crossed, actually, because the monarchy is meant to be a unifying force, and suddenly people are saying, what the hell are they doing by sacking this woman? I think that is very worrying. Having said that, I would say that the transition that we saw to King Charles III was quite extraordinary.
Yes,
it was very, very smooth. All the various ceremonies that we saw, the accession council, things like that, which most people had never seen before or didn't even know existed. It was almost like they've been doing them every week. It was so sure-footed, and that was extraordinary. And I also thought Charles, in the early days, handled it very, very well. I mean, I think the thing is that the monarchy is part of the value system of this country, so it will weather these storms that it's going through at the moment. Certainly with Meghan and Harry, it will. But I do think that they made rather an error in their reaction to this activist situation. You know, the woman who went into Buckingham Palace.
I think they panicked, didn't they? They just went into siege mode and said, well, what do we do? And I've just been thinking back across the royal story, and we've all been involved in various ways in commentating on it, and it's been an emotional roller coaster that in a way has reflected the emotional roller coaster of the story of the country over the last year, which has just been absolutely extraordinary, isn't it? But one of the things that I felt was, particularly at the death of the Queen, was the sheer genuine emotion and the sense of togetherness. Because don't forget, we've been told for years and years and years that there is no society, that we're completely fractured, that Britain is completely broken, and we get that, and it's real evidence that it isn't, and yet. This last few days with Meghan and Harry and with Lady Susan, just complete and utter shambles.
It actually reminds me rather, I don't know if you remember actually, Rafe, because you were commentating on it, I think. The Golden Jubilee was this huge unexpected success back in 2002. But by the end of the year, up came the Paul Burrell story. And it was almost like people in the media were saying, you've had your fun, right, now we're going to go for it again. And right at the end of the year, this happened. And
that always happens, doesn't it? You've had your little bit of fun, right, we're going to bat you down.
You'll have to tell me what the Paul Burrell story is.
Well, no, it was, people will know, I'm sure, watching, but it was just all these revelations coming out. He was in court about whether he'd stolen possessions from Princess Diana. It was all very tawdry, and most people don't know the details probably now. But the overall effect was to tarnish what had gone before, which was a great sort of triumph, I think. I mean, I think it is. You are always going to be fighting a kind of, in the media, disproportionate anti-monarchism, despite what they say.
Part of what is worrying in what has changed with the Queen's passing, and this sort of caught me off guard with this Ngozi Fulani story, that the response from the palace was almost corporate woke speak.
It was terrible.
It was a very corporate response condemning this poor lady, and it seemed completely out of keeping with the idea that, the way that Harry and Meghan refer to the royal family as the firm. I hadn't heard that until all of the Harry and Meghan saga.
What,
because
the firm?
I think,
you mean the firm?
Well,
no, they've always called themselves.
But the way that people think of them is in terms of a family. We don't think of them in terms of a corporate, and so for me that response suggested to me that the way that the monarchy is changing itself is. It put a slight dampener on the optimism that I had after the response to the Queen's death.
But what we've seen really has been a complete shift in terms of the people who are the powers behind the throne, if you will. The Queen's courtiers were very much an old school traditional set who believed very much in things being done in the way they had actually been done during King George VI's time. These are people from the 1950s. King Charles has a much more dynamic group of people advising him who aren't drawn from the same background, and it's even more present in Prince William, the Prince of Wales's advisors, who come from PR backgrounds and who are fully versed in all of this woke speak. And this is the problem that we have. The monarchy's secret to success, and the reason that we have a monarchy, whereas you don't find them in so many European countries, is because our monarchy has evolved and adapted with the times. But it's always stayed just behind the times, and that's been its secret, to evolve and adapt. So our monarchy is very different to the monarchy of the 90s, which is very different to the monarchy of the 70s, but it's never been at the cutting edge of fashion. And the danger here is that it is actually at the forefront of the culture wars. And the problem there is that you alienate your long-standing supporters, and you cannot take them for granted. I mean, yes, you can take me for granted. I'll be there with the monarchy till the very end. But at vast swathes of this country, and indeed amongst our viewers, you can see them growing more and more dissatisfied.
Well, actually, there's a danger, isn't there, that the monarchy is just going to become another institution, and the way they responded to that accusation, that ludicrous accusation, reminded me of the BBC or the universities or something like that. So I think, Rafe, you're absolutely right there. It's a generational shift, but them being at the cutting edge of all of this nonsense is actually really quite worrying.
You anticipated my question as well, so I was going to ask, what do you think the risk looks like? So what could they become?
Well, as you said, that they are part of the culture wars now. I mean, the fact is that they are the living symbol of this whole decolonization initiative. They're the living symbol of it. I mean, so the people that they want to curry favour with don't like them anyway.
This is exactly what
they just don't. They do not. What is it about the establishment? If you go back to Cameron,
it's like the Tory party, isn't it?
Hug a hoodie. It's the same thing. They somehow think. Can I do something in relation to the New Culture Forum here, actually? You might have seen Douglas Murray arguing with this year with Ed Vaizey. It was on YouTube and everything about education and all of that. I remember Ed Vaizey spoke at the New Culture Forum once. Of all the he was Conservative Arts Minister, right? Of all the things he could have said, the one thing he congratulated us on was that I had once tweeted saying we shouldn't judge actors if they're left wing. I like Vanessa Redgrave and I can put her politics to one side, right? And you might think, well, what's this? But the fact is that was the one thing as a Tory he congratulated us on. You know what I mean? Yeah. In other words, it's sort of against, yes, we should reach out. They're never going to like you, Ed. Yeah. Vanessa's never going to like you.
This is the same issue with the Church of England, right?
Yeah.
Yes. The Church of England is trying to be so woke to reach parts of the population who will never come over, but they're alienating at the same time the congregation. And the danger here is that the Church of England, that the monarchy will become as irrelevant as the monarchy as the monarchy may fast become. And the real test for me was the coronation, because the coronation service is one of the great jewels of Western civilization. No country on the planet has a coronation service as ancient and as sacred as our constitutional consecration of a monarch. And to hear that it's being reduced, pared down from 3.5 hours down to barely 2 hours, from 8,000 people to 2,000. The robes have been banned for the peers. Will now be wearing lounge suits. There'll be people there'll be NHS key workers in the congregation rather than the ancient ranks of the peerage or the chiefs of the general staff and so forth. And I remember I used to be a very good friend of the old Maharaja of Dharangadra, who was this wonderful chap who was the last ruling prince of his state when we still had a Raj. And he came up to Christchurch, Oxford in the 50s. He deliberately flew to Britain to shake hands with the King Emperor the week before he stopped being King Emperor. The wonderful chap. And he said to me, as a Hindu scholar, not Christian at all, he said, any attempt to tamper with the coronation would be an act of wanton destruction akin to dismantling Taj Mahal or Stonehenge. And for someone who's not Christian to think that, you can see the appreciation that they have, and yet to try to appease or appear to placate the woke brigade, you're going to dismantle this 1,000-year-old Christian tradition. I think it's scandalous.
But it's taking on an ideology that fundamentally wants to see them destroyed. That's the absolute kernel.
So I was going to mention Kinde Andrews' response to the Fulani story, because he was actually, as he usually is, actually quite explicit and clear about his opinions on these sorts of things. And he essentially said that an institution like the monarchy cannot be reformed because it is inherently white supremacist. So the ultimate goal on the farthest end, the enemies of the monarchy, is of course for the monarchy to be done away with. But as we saw with the Fulani case, they crumbled like that. And I look at that and I think, maybe it's just I'm being a natural pessimist. And I agree. I couldn't agree more with what you were saying about the coronation as well. That I didn't know that about the robes, and I find it very worrying that it's the opposite of what they should be doing. What they should be doing is having a large grand coronation, because we haven't had one in so long. The people need to see it. They need to be able to participate in their culture. We saw how well that worked with the Queen's funeral, and it shows hope. It shows an expectation of the monarchy going into the future. This is just like, it's almost like the monarchy is expecting to go out with a whimper and to just be transformed.
It parades. Sorry to interrupt you. It parades a kind of identity that fights back against this other kind of identity. I was just thinking about this the other day. There's a sense of what is Britishness, the traditional aspects of Britishness, which is, the monarchy, democracy, family, the common law, all of those things on the one hand. The the woke BLM, LGBTQI stuff, on the other hand, is trying to push all of that stuff away. So just to make the point very quickly, that if you ask young people about, what is Britishness, they'll say all of the alphabet stuff. They won't say the traditional stuff.
Yeah.
And for the monarchy and for the institutions to appropriate that identity, it's not just a set of ideas. They're taking on a different identity, and because they're taking on that identity, they're destroying the identity that's there.
I think that is absolutely key, because it goes to the very heart of liberalism, the idea that we are defined by values, we're defined by something in the abstract. We're not, we're defined by these material historical things.
Because values change all the time.
And,
Actually, that's a very interesting point, actually, Emma, because you see, I live here, I moved out of London a year ago. And again, if you had to sort of, this point about values, signing up to values, right? When people now say, well, what is a Londoner? Right? I always thought I knew what a Londoner was. It's a kind of communal backstory, a communal history, right? Now, being a Londoner is signing up to a set of values. That is how you define a Londoner, right? Those values are not ones I share, right? So hence, skedaddle. But this is the point, well, what are these values? Environmentalism, multiculturalism, citizens of the worldship, all of these things, liberal values. And in fact, you can't actually just create something out of a kind of check sheet of values. It's either there organically or it's not. And increasingly it's not.
Even the definition of British values, democracy, tolerance. All of these things that you would say, yes, these things are good, but they're not what make us us.
No.
It's a completely shallow abstraction of who we are as a people. So no wonder that nothing can survive on this milk.
Beneath those values, actually, it's not even a set of values. It's something much more. It's quicksand. It's a set of rights claims, and they really do change all the time.
Well, I think this is it, because the reality is that set of values applies only to predominantly white liberals living in London. To the vast majority of London, actually, there are other values that they've brought with them, which run counter to those very liberal values.
I think before you move on to another topic, which I'm sure you're about to, he said, pushing her along. I think what is interesting is that one of the highest selling prints this year was by an artist in Yorkshire. This lady who's seen her career just transformed. She did this beautiful little print, a drawing of the Queen going into the distance holding Paddington Bear's hand. And this has struck a chord because it was a kind of farewell. And it's very hard to look back now on June without seeing it as a kind of farewell. There was more celebration at this Jubilee than any time since the Silver Jubilee. But was it actually a sort of swan song? It's hard not to see it. Maybe.
It's hard to imagine that kind of outpouring for Charles, that's for sure. But you're right, we do have to move on.
By the way, we have people here.
Yeah, you just read my mind. So I was just going to say, not only are we inviting you to have a drink here with us for our Christmas special, but we also have some friends here.
Come on, hey.
So, inappropriate transition now to talk about immigration and the census. So Peter, do you want to kick us off by taking us through?
No, it is actually in a year full of sort of firsts, if you like, and historical precedents being set. We had the highest level of migration on record this year, 500,000 people coming net into Britain. What I think is interesting, by the end of the year, something which they had managed to kick into the long grass. I never thought people actually really did give up caring about it, but that was the received wisdom that people cared less because they thought things were under control. That has now been blown apart, right? And I think therefore immigration will be the death of the Tory party, right? Looking forward, actually. And I think it will become the kind of Brexit of the next few years. And I think it's quite right that it should be, because more than any other issue, people have been systematically ignored on this for so long. I think it's the reason why our system has, there's such a diminishing of trust in our system because of this, because the very root of what we are has been essentially transformed without consent. Without consent.
I think Douglas Murray, I think you mentioned this in a show a couple of weeks ago, where Douglas Murray said it's the one thing. First, my guess is it might well do for the Tory party, as you've just said, because consistently they haven't done anything about it. I mean, I can't think of anything that they have done. I was just thinking about the Tory party generally, and between us, we know lots of Tories, don't we? We know lots of people who conservatives, small c conservatives. I don't know anyone who's actually going to vote for the Conservative Party this time, but that's slightly an aside. Douglas Murray said, we didn't vote for this. Nobody voted for this. It was just foisted upon us, and it is fundamental demographic change that is going to absolutely.
Well, this is
in fact, actually,
change our
I
culture.
would just simply come back on that. Yes, of course. The other historical thing this year is that we've got 3 cities, our biggest cities, now with minority white British. I mean, but to an extraordinary extent. In London, it's now 36%, I think, white British. Within a generation. You're going off to see a film about London tomorrow, aren't you? 1992, right? 1992, just over a generation. An utter transformation, right? And also retrospectively, what they're doing now is retrospectively saying, but actually it was always the way. It was always the way. What are you arguing about? No, it was not.
But you've made this point before, haven't you, that not just a country, but also a city is the historical memories of its people.
Yeah.
And if you bring in new people, then the attachment to the place, the memories of what took place in certain, and the relevance of that to you as a person, that cord is broken.
But it's the collective memory, as you were saying the other day, isn't it? The collective memory just disintegrates, and with the experience, the collective experience, the culture disintegrates. That's just what happens, and that's how things come to an end.
It's also the year that we've seen historic numbers of people coming illegally across the Channel, but particularly young men from Albania. Albania is a Muslim majority country. Of all of the religions in the census, the one that grew the most was Islam over the last 10 years. So in some ways, this is not just the year in review, this is the last decade in review. And the upheaval that we have identified now, we all knew it because we saw it happening, but we now have confirmation of that. What if we're looking forward to next year and we're looking at the trends, we're looking at exponentially higher numbers of people coming illegally across the Channel, probably nothing much being done about that. How does that make you feel, Rafe?
Well, all I can say is, had Hitler known it would be so easy to just buy some dinghies and cross the Channel rather than use battleships, he may well have invaded this country. So inept are we, keeping back people coming over on a rubber boat, apparently. But yeah, it's, we've had 10,000 Albanians come over, about 2% of the population of Albania. 8,000 of them have been young men of fighting age. I saw a map somewhere showing all of the hotels around the country.
400.
Something like there are 40,000 young men of fighting age encamped around the entire spine of this nation. I mean, this is an army at rest in this country, all of whom, or many of whom, are here without having any legal rights to being here in terms of being genuine asylum seekers. This is a huge betrayal by the Tory party of the British people. People voted in 2016 to take back control. Every manifesto the Tory party have put out for the last 15 years has promised to get immigration down to the tens of thousands until the last manifesto, which was just to reduce it. And by any measure, not only have they failed, they have betrayed the nation in willingly going along with this Blairite revolution, but actually putting it into steroids, because we have to discount this whole notion of 500,000 net immigration, because it's actually 1.1 million immigration in total. 500,000 people left this country, and you have to ask, who was actually leaving. And there's a brain drain going on. People don't discuss this. The brightest and the best of this nation are going to America, to Canada, Australia and elsewhere. So this is, in large part, a replacement of the population in such a short period of time. And Peter, you were saying, London has gone from almost 60% in 2001, white British, 59%, down to 36.6%, completely with unprecedented. No society can sustain such change.
Can I just make one more point on that as well? It's not just about the kind of the influx and the change, it's about the idea of siege, isn't it? And we saw Albanian flags flying in very symbolic and emotive places, and with nobody seemingly doing anything about it, anything meaningful about it. So there is a sense it's not only just bodies, it's ideology and it's culture, it's all of those things.
This leads us
together.
very cleanly on to the subject of the unbelievable political change that, well, I say unbelievable political change, nothing really ever does change, but the personnel has changed dramatically. We've had how many prime ministers this year?
It's 3 prime ministers technically, isn't it? Boris Johnson, Liz Truss, and then now was she?
And who knows how many people in various other posts. So I think we've broken some records for the shortest amount of time in particular ministerial posts. And we've seen, as you were saying, Rafe, total ineptitude in dealing with illegal immigration, total ineptitude in dealing with crime, in dealing with the Just Stop Oil protesters who have been causing chaos. We've seen increasing strikes, talk of a general strike. So lots of people have said that this is like going back to the 1970s.
It sort of is. Sorry, because actually I think I probably can remember the 70s better than anyone here. Actually, seriously, my first time I ever voted was indeed 1979 with Thatcher. The difference was, yes, it is like the 70s in that sense. With one big difference, we were culturally quite intact in the 70s.
Yeah, that's the difference.
And the difference that makes is extraordinary.
Yeah.
And so it was an economic battle that Thatcher came in to win. Thatcher didn't do very much on the cultural front. The point's often made, but she didn't really need to. It was all notional. Oh, lefties in the arts, lefties in schools. Yeah, sure, okay, not a big problem. So it wasn't a compelling thing. It was the economic thing, which she seemed to have slain, and I still think actually probably has. I think that argument has actually been won, capitalism or socialism. But no, we were still very much, we knew who we were. We absolutely knew who we were, and that is entirely changed. What's also changed, as I'm sure for me anyway, is the caliber of the people. When you see, I think Rafe, didn't you put up a tweet of Thatcher leaving Downing Street like 30 years or whatever it was ago, and you look and you think, my God, they were people of extraordinary stature once, and you look at that joke of a politician, Liz Truss, and you sort of think, how low can we possibly go?
Or even Rishi Sunak, who seems like a head boy.
Yes, can we kind of go any lower? And I think the reason for that is our politics now, they're so degraded. Who is going to go into it?
Another aspect of this is, predictions of the death of the Conservative Party, whether it will fracture, whether we'll see a new party, possibly Reform, rising up. And what do you think of that? Do you think that in the last year what we've seen are the final breaths of the Conservative Party?
I can understand why many would argue that 2022 has been the year that the Tories signed their death warrant, or at least were put onto death watch or diagnosed with a terminal disease. To think how they've gone from 2019 with an 80-seat majority. 3 years ago there was so much hope there, and we were all forecasting, I certainly was, at least 10 years of Tory rule, because to get rid of 80 seats was
most people were saying a generation,
maybe even 15 years. And you had Dominic Cummings there, who had in place this plan to reform the BBC, reform the civil service, do many of the changes that were absolutely necessary. And to see that hemorrhaged away through such incompetence, and then to see Liz Truss bringing in the very policies that actually Boris Johnson and Cummings knew wouldn't work, going hard to the right on economics when only 6% of the nation want that, and then going far to the left on immigration, opening up open borders, completely deaf tone to what the nation wants. And I thought after that, the Tory party just doesn't get it.
I think we have to bring Peter Hitchens into this, don't we? Because he's always said for years and years and years, the only way to get true conservatism is to well, essentially crash the vehicle that bears the name, which is the Conservative and Unionist Party. And I'd always kind of balked at that, and I always thought, well, no, because if you don't vote Conservative, then you get Labour, and that's going to be 10 times worse. And I'm struggling to see the difference between the two of them.
Well,
It's not 10 times worse.
It's not 10 times
No,
worse. That's what I'm
there's barely any
saying. I'm
difference.
struggling to see the difference.
Which means that people will think, well, what's different if I vote for the Labour Party, because I can't take any more of this.
Well, actually, they're going further than that, aren't they? Because they're kind of outflanking the Tories on some things.
They're outflanking the
Well,
Tories on immigration.
On immigration, certainly. If you see people like Owen Jones and Ash Sarkar up in arms about Keir Starmer all the time, you know that Keir Starmer understands where the centre ground is and may pull off
But how
a Blair
cynical that may
revolution.
be.
And there's just one more thing as well. That is no reason to vote for anybody just because you don't want someone. You've got to vote positively, and you've got to vote for what you want. So I'm thinking, like everybody else, I'm looking to the smaller parties now.
Something that really does need mentioning as well is the whole cost of living situation.
Yeah.
Obviously, there's so much that's happened this year to cover the war in Ukraine, the cost of energy, the cost of food, the fact that the Conservatives have responded by basically taxing everybody up to the eyeballs so that they, they're drowning in all sorts of stealth taxes and things like that. What do you think are the implications of this if we look to the year ahead? Do you think that people will think, well, I might as well vote for Labour? Do you think that the Reform Party will start creeping up, even getting much higher numbers in the polls?
Well, put it this, with the Reform Party, we spoke to Richard Tice recently. Many people quite like the cut of his jib, but I think the thing is, UKIP started in 1993, and it took it until 2008, I think, actually, to seriously break through. So you're talking about a long time, right?
We don't have the luxury of
The only
time.
thing is that if you're looking at the future, because we're talking about on the whole, very kind of grim things, aren't we? Right? But one real big chink of light is that we've got 2 years now until the election. We will know, in a defining way, whether the Tory party kind of goes in a kind of candidate type way, in the 1990s, or whether it survives or what. But there will be something which will be quite profoundly defining, and that's actually should give you cheer, in the sense that something to work towards, something to work. Finally, if you want to get rid of this hulk or should I say husk of a Tory party, now is the time. Now is the time. No other time.
But the walk up to that is just going to be one instance of chaos after another, after another, because that's what we've had for the last few years, and it's actually intensified. It's ratcheted up so much in this year that I look, with the cost of living, you're talking about the cost of living crisis, I look forward, bearing that in mind, and I just see utter catastrophe, chaos.
We have to remember also, though, that the Tory party is the world's oldest and most successful party, and it's achieved that by having no ideology and no principles, unlike the left. No Tories ever read a book of philosophy.
Don't hold back,
They're
Rafe.
entirely they're entirely pragmatic. That's not a bad thing in and of itself, but that's how they've managed to stay so long. So what we actually may end up having is a repeat of what happened in '97. The Tories out of power for a decade or so to get their house in order. Because I think my point has always been for a long time, actually only 40% of this country tend to vote for right-wing parties. 60% vote for left-wing parties. The advantage the Tories have had is that the left has been fractured for so long. So if we do fracture the right-wing vote, which I think we will, and I think it needs to be done, between, say, Reform and the Tories, then that's the Conservatives. I mean, that's the right wing out of power for a generation.
Unfortunately, we're running a bit low on time. So final thoughts on possibly the most discussed subject on Newspeak this year, which is culture. So Philip, do you want to take us through your sort of review of the year in terms of all that's been going on with the woke, I hate using that term now, but the woke march through our institutions and our culture, and just a general lack of good cultural products, you know, good films or good anything.
Well,
or the lack thereof.
I think Peter mentioned that the other day, and it got me to thinking about emblems, and it got me to thinking about the identitarians and the woke in the way in which they're imposing themselves on us in a way that they've never done before. So, yes, the rainbow flag has been around for years, but now it's utterly ubiquitous. It's, you know, it's on postal vans, it's at the train station, it's everywhere. We've got coppers in size 12 red stiletto shoes with their uniforms, and this is a statement, isn't it, saying, you know, you've got to not only accept this, you've got to buy into it as well. So you can't be passive anymore. You can't just say nothing and be non-racist. Now you have to be actively anti-racist. And of course that doesn't mean you're being anti-racist, it just means you're being ideological. But what they're doing with all of these emblems and all of these kind of very in your face saying, look, we're here, respond to us, they're making you actively buy into these things. And if you don't buy into these things, you become victimized immediately. You know, if you're quiet on racism and you're just quietly non-racist, then you're an enabler.
Silence is violence.
Silence is violence, but you're not an ally. And I think what's happened with the woke revolution, I suppose, is this ratcheting up. So the word ally, which used to be a very positive word to me, has become one of the most sinister words in the language.
Peter, do you think that ideology has basically killed off culture, in the sense that we've seen some films getting cancelled this year because they were so woke that nobody wanted to see them?
Yeah, but I'd say those are the exception that proves the rule. I mean, people make a lot of fuss about these films, quite right. Batwoman was one, I think.
She-Hulk or something silly.
I mean, generally speaking, you know what you're going to get.
Yeah.
You know what you're going to get.
But we're not actually seeing any. There isn't a great deal of good art being made, unless I'm missing.
No, I think
there was the queer rom-com as well, wasn't there? I can't remember. Was it called Bros or something? You know, it wasn't just a gay rom-com. It was a queer rom-com, wasn't it? And that absolutely tanked. You know, and so that's another example.
But you also had that film, Woman King, about the black warriors in Benin and the Kingdom of Dahomey. And they were celebrated as champions, these great feminist, figures we should all sort of idolize. Now these were slave-owned. This was one of the most brutal slave-owning areas of Africa.
King Gizo of Dahomey was the biggest slave, in terms of the percentage of his population.
And they would annually slaughter thousands of slaves in human sacrifice rituals, And you couldn't imagine making a film about these people if they were white, but because they were black, nobody in the mainstream media once thought there was something at all odd about celebrating the worst possible slave owners that ever existed.
I think the thing is, with this and what you just mentioned, critics. The point is about the whole kind of cultural output is that on the whole that what you're going to get, as I said. You also know what the critics are going to say. You also know that they will never ever stand up for what seems to be a right-wing film. Just think about it. Every novel, I go into Waterson's now, I look, I think maybe I should read, and I think, why? What's the point, actually? They have a staff pick there, it's all left-wing. You know that the novels are going to be largely orthodox. I mean, we have an exhausted culture anyway. I mean, that was the case anyway, But I think that basically ideology, to go back to your question, Emma, has trumped everything else, and that's absolutely the death of creativity. That's why nothing has any resonance anymore. Nothing has any resonance. It's a lifestyle choice. It's become a lifestyle choice. That's all. What worries me is that they can get on with it if they like. What worries me is when they start doing it retrospectively.
Yeah, I think just one thing on that picks, the staff picks there. I don't go to Waterstones anymore now, but there used to be, years ago, there used to be a whole array of novels. And I'm thinking of Dahomey, and I'm thinking of the novelist George MacDonald Fraser, who wrote the Flashman series, which Flash for Freedom is absolutely about that. But his novels used to be on the shelves, and I don't think they're there anymore. I think they've been taken away because they're not,
So we can't end on a bleak note because it's Christmas and we're running out of time. So I think we should go through our highlights of the year, in brief, of course. So I'll start by saying, for me, the highlight of the year was actually being in the queue, seeing Her Majesty, and seeing. So I, as a child, when I met the Queen, forgot to curtsy to her, and I kicked myself for it. I was mortified. And I finally got the opportunity to curtsy.
And you got ill, didn't you, as a result?
I did, yeah. I was out
yes.
for a week. But what about you, Peter? What's your highlight?
Yeah, no, I was in that queue too. And dare I say it, God, major, with our viewers, the BBC did something quite special. I think it wasn't even intentional, but by having that live stream of the queue, they have forever kept a snapshot of Britain in 2022. It was utterly compelling. You couldn't stop watching it. So I think that was wonderful. On a personal level, I brag about it. I had a wonderful 2-hour meeting with Prime Minister Viktor Orban. So for me, that is a very that's a real highlight for the year, I think.
That's going to be hard. That's going to be hard to outdo, I'm afraid. So, Philip.
Well, yeah, I can't say I've met any presidents or prime ministers or anything this year, but who knows about next year. But for me, actually, it's contributing to the book, Fighting Back, mainly because it's such a positive response to the culture war, and it's part of, and our brilliant editor Stephen is just sat opposite me here. It's part of the orchestration. It's part of a very definite and organised pushback, and I'm very proud to be at the vanguard of that.
That's a good part.
Right.
And for me, well, it's not dissimilar to your own, but it was in June when I was outside the palace commentating for the Platinum Jubilee. And I was on this raised dais, happened to have Nigel Farage on my right-hand side, by the by, which added to the moment a bit, and we both commented on it. And the Queen came out on the balcony for the very last time.
We were there
with the whole family.
That should have been
as the planes flew past. The Great Battle of Britain memorial flights came over as well. And I thought, gosh, she's been there in our lives since the Second World War. We remember that first appearance before she was Queen with Winston Churchill, Margaret, Elizabeth, her mother, and King George. They've all gone. She was the last remaining figure from that era, and now she's gone from all of our lives. But that was a nice end to that chapter.
What a beautiful, beautiful note to end our Christmas special on. So, thank you.
Shouldn't we wish people happy Christmas?
Yes,
we?
well.
Charge your glasses. If you still got any left.
You preempted me,
drinking, are you?
Peter.
I've got a little bit of Coke. Coca-Cola, I should say.
So I just wanted to start by saying thank you to all of you guys for watching us.
Yeah,
thank you for watching at home and for watching us for the entire year as well.
Yeah.
And so many of you who have given your comments below and who have come to our events, and it's been a joy meeting you over the last year.
Oh, it has been
and
fantastic.
thank you so much, Peter, for everything that you're doing at the
Yeah,
Culture
thanks,
Forum.
Peter.
Thank you, Rafe. Thank you, Philip.
Yeah.
Thank you,
And
Ollie. Our
Cheers.
Merry
cameraman.
Christmas.
And thanks,
Yes.
Ollie. Cheers.
Merry Christmas to you.
Yeah,
Happy
and thank you,
Christmas.
Ollie.
Yeah. Thank you, Ollie, who's
Our
behind the camera.
long-suffering cameraman.
Yeah, thank you. Take
Merry
care.
Christmas.
Bye-bye. Hello. If you're enjoying the New Culture Forum channel and you believe in our mission, may I invite you to join our membership scheme at the link below or on our website, newcultureforum.org.uk. Our work is more important now than ever, and we have great plans ahead for the future, but we can't do it without your support. From as little as £3 per month, you can help ensure that we continue on our mission. As a member, you'll receive a range of benefits, including access to exclusive content, invitations to our private events, including here at our studios, free copies of our books, and much, much more, including, of course, our famous NCF mug. If you aren't able to become a member, then please help us by clicking this button and subscribing to our channel. It's completely free. Just remember to also click the bell icon so that you can get notifications when we post new videos. Thank you.